Welcome to the OFCCP Institute's webinar on the new sex discrimination guidelines, or the discrimination on the basis of sex, which will, once they go final, that's what they'll be called. I am one of the co-chairs of the OFCCP Institute. My name is David Cohen. I'm joined today by Mickey Silberman. And calling in remotely, we have David Fortney. So you don't get to see his pretty face, but he will certainly add in some commentary. Before we get started talking about the new proposed regulations, we wanted to give you an update on what's happening here at the OFCCP Institute. So at the end of this month in San Francisco, February 25th and 26th, we will be having our two-day conference. During that conference, we'll be joined by the regional director, Jeanette Whipper, who will be briefing Institute participants on what's happening at OFCCP. We, the three co-chairs, will also be joined by our all-star faculty, and we'll be covering things like an update on all the recent proposed regs, some of the executive orders. We'll talk about enforcement trends. We'll talk about 503 and VEVRA. We've got plenty to talk about over the 2 days, and hope to see some of you there. I think that we still have some availability. So check out our website at theofccpinstitute.org. In addition to that, this year we've launched membership. So if you're interested in becoming a member of the OFCCP Institute, once again, check out our website. There's a lot of information on there. So let's get right into it, gentlemen. Let's talk about the new proposed regulation. As I said earlier, the regs that are on the books are called the sex discrimination guidelines, and OFCCP is looking to change that, and the new title will be the discrimination on the basis of sex. These are not guidelines. These will be regulatory. So what's in the proposed regs? Mick, you want to kick off?
Yeah, let me take the lead. Although I want to mention one thing about the conference that David just mentioned. So, David, as I understand it, I know this, annually you ask the OFCCP through a FOIA request for all conciliation agreements, and you will be getting those now or very soon, so that one of the things we'll be able to do at the conference is be able to, after you've digested it, be able to present on what we see in the way of conciliation agreement trends from the OFCCP. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. We've OFCCP notified us that we'll be receiving all the conciliation agreements this week, and we'll take those and put them into a database and analyze them. And we'll cover all the recent steering cases, the compensation cases. So we're really excited about that.
So one more good topic, folks, that we'll be able to cover at the conference. To the regulations, the proposed regulations. And even this, as Cohen just mentioned, this is an important distinction. Previously, we had guidelines. OFCCP, and I'll quote for you, OFCCP has made clear that these will be regulations and final, and this is the quote: "The change is intended to make clear that the provisions in this part are regulations implementing the executive order with the full force and effect of law." So that's the first point to make here, folks. OFCCP very clearly intends for these to be formalized as regulations and for employers to have specific requirements and also specific prohibitions that come out of these regulations. They are proposed at this point. They will be, there's a comment period that is open now until the end of March 31st. The Institute plans to prepare a comment, and we will seek input from members of the Institute. What about the substance of it? Well, let's start here. The proposed reg is 108 pages. This is not a quick, hey, just kick the tires and update it and change it so that it's no longer a male pronoun and change it to now male and female pronouns, and otherwise it's pretty much the same. It's not. This is a very different document. It is much more broad. It is much more ambitious. And an observation I have as an attorney in reading through this is that the OFCCP seeks to characterize these proposed regulations as just an interpretation based on existing Title VII case law. There are many parts of the proposed regulations that I interpret as being an extension, a fairly aggressive approach that really seeks to push out the edge of the interpretation of Title VII case law to make it more expansive in terms of protections, but also prohibitions for employers. So one example of that is in the area of compensation. I think we all know that compensation has been the top a top, if not the top priority, both for the agency, but also as driven directly from the White House itself. And OFCCP in these proposed regulations makes clear that their interpretation of paid discrimination will encompass comparisons of individuals who are not similarly situated in the narrow sense, in the way that Title VII and most Title VII case law that speaks to the idea of what similarly situated is, and as a basis for comparing folks, OFCCP is more broad. And the language that they use here is very similar to what they've included in the Directive 307, which they issued last year, which guides compliance officers on how to look at employees from a pay perspective. And one of the hallmarks of Directive 307 is that employees who are comparable within an employer's pay system, emphasis on comparable and emphasis on system, that those folks can be compared, even if they are not similarly situated in terms of their actual duties, their responsibilities, their experience, and their seniority levels. OFCCP is seeking to make law here through these regulations. The directive that was put out last year is simply a directive. It's sub-regulatory. In fact, it doesn't govern contractors at all. It provides guidance to compliance officers in their enforcement.
Yeah, and I think, Mickey, that's a really important point, is that, OFCCP is really codifying 307 within a regulation. And why that is so important is, we have a presidential election coming up soon. If, a new administration comes in, because it's just a guideline, they could just get rid of Directive 307 and potentially implement the standards again. By codifying it into a regulation and taking 307 and putting it into a reg, a new administration would have to go through the whole rulemaking process, notice and comment, to change it. So I think it's really important to note that if they go final, they will be regulation and have the effect of law on contractors.
That's exactly right. And I think it's an important distinction.
Let's talk about some of the other add-ons, because I think that's right. And it's not just codifying 307, but also codifying the recently announced steering concepts. Those also now would be codified as part of these effectively, legislative type of regulations that they want to create. Additionally, there's a wide range of other issues outside of compensation, very far-reaching in terms of accommodating pregnancy conditions, accommodating a variety of transgender issues, requiring separate what facilities are to be provided. It effectively reads into, under the auspices of sex discrimination, both obligations that may or may not exist under the Americans with Disabilities Act, under the Family and Medical Leave Act. A number of points now are going to be encompassed as part of OFCCP's enforcement portfolio, including, in some areas, although to Mickey's point, what they claim to be doing is codifying existing law. The fact is that in some areas, what they're codifying is not existing law, at least for private sector employers. The federal government has slightly different standards that are more, if you will, lenient, and what OFCCP has done without any acknowledgement of this, but they've tried now to implant all those federal workforce standards and impose them on the federal contractor community. So it would represent a fundamental shift, at least as proposed, I think.
Yeah, I agree, David. And one of the things, another point I want to make about the proposed regulation that I think it's interesting is, they go into detail about disparate treatment and disparate impact, and they're talking about performance appraisal systems and evaluating those performance appraisal systems. But the one thing under that section that I found so interesting, and I'll read it, and it's under the disparate treatment section. It says, recruiting or advertising for individuals for certain jobs on the basis of sex. I find that language to be interesting because isn't that by definition what we're required to do under the affirmative action plan, is identify where we're underutilized and have targeted outreach and recruitment based upon sex? So I think that language is interesting. I don't think that's the intent of OFCCP, but the language is vague enough to say, are we allowed to engage in affirmative action? The other thing that's interesting at the second half of that sentence says, including the use of gender-specific terms for jobs. So advertising a job, they use an example as of a lineman, that would be evidence of disparate treatment. A foreman, I think that's a stretch. I did a search on USA Jobs, and I found hundreds of jobs that the federal government, is currently listing with linemen, foremen, man hours. So I found that to be very interesting. But to Mickey's point, I mean, these regs are very broad.
So the takeaway I'd say, folks, here first is in late February at our conference in San Francisco, we're going to dig into detail on this, what this means, what we should start thinking about. But let your voice be heard. That's really the takeaway as far as I'm concerned. I believe the OFCCP is trying to include the kitchen sink, so to speak, in these regulations. The Directive 307 was quite controversial when it came out and has been so far in its enforcement. But employers have taken some comfort in the fact that, strictly speaking, it's not a legal requirement on them. Well, this changes the game. This seeks to take Directive 307, as Cohen said, and make it, codify it, and make it law. You have an opportunity to read this, to listen to experts on it, and to have your voice heard on this. You've got about 55 days or so now until the comment period is closed. Use that time, folks, to read this, become expert on it, and make your voice heard.
Yeah, and we'll certainly be reaching out to our members to get input from our members. But come to the event. We're going to be going into this in more detail, and we'd love to hear from you. For information about the event, once again, check out our website at theofccpinstitute.org. Gentlemen, any closing thoughts?
I'm glad I'm in Denver where it's 65 degrees and sunny.
Wow. No, this is going to be a huge topic for us in San Francisco and for the next, 5-6 weeks. So join us because we could use everyone's insight and everyone on this listening to this. I would ask, please read these proposed regulations very, very carefully and think about, gosh, if these became law, how would they affect my organization?
Yeah, excellent point. Thanks so much for joining us today. Hope to see you soon.
See you in San Francisco.
Thank you.
Thanks.